our ancestors are from out of Tippah County, which at that time it was called Benton, and Corn and everything else was Tippah County at that time. And most of our members are from this area. And Grant is too, there's several bunches of them. But he's just such an interesting man to talk to. We've been wanting to get up here and just ad-lib and just talk to y'all for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and just tell him let him tell you what he knows about Tippah County back in the old days. The mayor of Yellow Rabbit Creek, Grant Graves.
I appreciate that, and glad to be here tonight. Well, my family has been 6 generations of being here in Tippah County on both sides. And what I'll sort of focus on tonight is some of my mother's folks, because sort of what they had to do with the oncoming of the war and during the war. And they had quite a bit to do with it. Of course, it's nothing, there's been no history books or a lot of stuff of that nature, but it's interesting to this county and this community, and some stuff I think people might find some interest in. And I had pretty good teachers growing up, because I had 3 real son uncles who lived till the 1990s from Tippah County, and several other relatives that I was fortunate to have for a long time. And these people taught us this heritage, and it was well known throughout our community by other people, and I'm proud to have been taught that by my family. I wouldn't have it then, taught it, been proud of it. My granddaddy Simpson was born, the first one that came here from out of Tippah County, in 1805 in North Carolina. He moved as a little boy to Humphreys County, Tennessee. When these land treaties to the Chickasaw Indians and all were signed, he moved down here in 1835 and settled on Yellow Rabbit Creek on the same land we live on today in February of 1835. At that time, he began building a log house there, built a north room first, and he added to it, built a hallway through the middle. Got your dog trot houses like we put up through here in that time. It still stands today, and the Simpson family still lives in it, 6 generations, never changed hands, nobody else ever lived in it. And my mother was the last one of our generation born there. It's still lived in by the 6th generation son today. And during this time, it was inhabited by the Chickasaw Indians. He didn't have any neighbors. He was fortunate to make good friends with these Indians. And when the last detachment was called upon them to leave this area, they refused to go unless he went with them. They had an Indian chief buried in a mound about 3/4 mile northeast of our home. That mound's still there today, not been bothered. And these Indians, for the 2 or 3 years they was here till he left, would on occasion walk by that mound, he'd see them, and all put a handful of dirt on this mound. And respect for that Indian, the Indian chief's name was Yellow Rabbit. And evidently that's where this creek and all got its name, Yellow Rabbit Creek. Yellow Rabbit Bottom still is today. When that detachment was called on, they said they wouldn't go unless he went along with them. So to keep it from being a problem, he went with them. And they crossed the Mississippi River where Memphis, Tennessee is now. I don't think it was much there, about 1837 to 38. But he went with them. I don't know how long they was gone. They crossed on flat boats. And when they got to where the destination was, he came back home. He had 4 children when he come here, and 4 more born after they got there. He'd ride a mule, a pontoc, or a horse across where Etta, Mississippi is. It was called Rocky Ford at that time. And buy take $16 and buy 160 acres of land through the General Land Office. In this manner, between 1836 and 1850, according to the land books down there, he had 17,000 acres by 1850. It runs from about 4 miles up and down the Tippah River bottom, and up and down the little tributary that joined it in there, up Yellow Rabbit and some of the other creeks. So through hard work and saving his land, he had very little when he come here. He worked hard, him with his children and his wife, and They accumulated some servants along the way. What other records I've got of some of them? Some through Forest and Maples, Memphis. Some through various other places. But he evidently was very good at his service. Very few left after the war. Didn't want to leave. And a lot of their descendants are still in our community today. So he was doing good up till, of course, January 9th, 1861, when we had to get out of the Union because of all this trouble that everybody knows was going on. We had the second state to withdraw on that day. And he had 4 sons. Well, they all joined Company K when it was organized out in Salem. This was the first part of '62 before this was organized. They all 4 joined Company K, 34th Mississippi Infantry. And he had a son-in-law join this one also. Now, I've never been able to verify whether his son-in-law was killed, but he died in Columbus, Mississippi, August 11th, 1862. Got his papers. I don't know if it was from disease or whether he was killed. Well, the first bad battle they was in was Perryville, Kentucky, October 8th, 1862, or the worst one. And I do know, I've done some research on this battle that the 34th was in, because his 4 sons was right in the thick of it, and the 34th suffered heavily in it, because 2 of them were killed that day. And the 34th entered that battle, and Colonel Sam Benton was the colonel over that regiment, and they were supported that day by General J.S. Jackson, who they tried to make several repeated charges against Parsons Battery, and finally carried it that afternoon, but with a terrible cost. At the Company K that they were in, now this 34th was made up of 9 companies, 4 from Tippah County, a great deal of people from right in this area, 4 from Marshall, 1 from Lafayette, made up a total of staff and field men of 779 men. And at the end of the day, Company K that his sons belonged to had 7 men left standing for service. Dr. Farrell, who was the regimental surgeon of that unit, told him that when the war was over, he lived there at Ashland, he said, "Your son Sam was so close to the enemy when he was killed, his clothes was powder burned all over." So they was right in the middle of it, I guess. And a whole lot of people from the community there was killed that day, because as you know, these regiments are made up from, companies are made up from communities, regiments. But anyway, after this war, after that battle and all, his other 2 sons survived the war, but he wasn't there through what was going to happen to him during that war. He was there at his place, doing what he could. He bought a lot of Confederate bonds and stuff to try to help the Confederacy. In December of 1863, General Forrest needed money for a conscription act through West Tennessee to try to raise money for more soldiers. And at this time, he bought several Confederate bonds. I know there's one there for $8,000, and I think another or 2 for less than that still belong to my great uncle. And to make up money, and several other people, I'm sure, bought them. And they went into West Tennessee he didn't go, but the people that was doing it did. And to make up money, get up soldiers, because it was getting low, I'm sure, by that time. People getting low on money by that time, too, I can tell you. And I'm sure this was put up with gold, and they were never redeemed, because they still got them there at home. But this was done, and he had a lot of Confederate money there, and I'm sure that was put up with gold when he got it. Well, then in 1864, when A.J. Smith came down in here, they was mad at the world, because about a month before, General Forrest whipped them out of their boots down here at Bryce's Crossroads, and they didn't like that. Well, they come back down here to get him, which they never did. Every time they sent somebody, and they didn't that time. But they was taking it out on anybody they could get close to. They come there one night to that old house down there at home, kicked the door down in the middle of the night, and drug him out of the bed, all through the creek down there. First, it's right next to the house where the people spend their nose. Asked him first, did he know who any Union men were in Tippah County? He said if there was one, he didn't know of it. He said he didn't know of one. He couldn't tell him any. Then they asked him, did he have any buried gold there? He told them no, he didn't have nothing there. Had a little bit of Confederate money. This made him even madder. They put a gun to his head and told him they was going to shoot him. And his daughter that lived till 1917 was hidden where she could hear it, and she said till she died, he said, I dare you to shoot me. Well, for some reason they didn't, and put a rope around his neck and hanged him and left. When they thought he was dead, they took him down and got the rope. And a servant and his daughter Eliza went down there and got him quickly as they could to see, of course, thinking he was dead. Well, he wasn't dead. He was still breathing. They brought him to the house, and his tongue stayed swollen out of his mouth 3 days, but he did not die, and continued to live, and fought with everything he could. Now, at this same time, this bunch come on across here, up through Whitten Branch, those of you that's familiar with that, on up here to Ripley. That's when they burned Ripley to the ground. Uncle Ned Barnett, a faithful servant. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him or not. A very faithful servant, was 12 years old, of Colonel Faulkner. And he stood right on the north side of the square up here, where the Finger Store building is still standing today, north side of this courthouse, and watched the whole thing. He said first they set the courthouse on fire, then Mr. Richard Prince's home, then R.F. Ford home, then Barry Silversmith's shop, and then just numerous store buildings. And then the Methodist Church was full of forage and hay for the Confederate Army. They said it next with the excuse that was the reason, then burned the Presbyterian and Baptist churches, which had nothing in them. Burned some 35 businesses and churches and all this. And Uncle Ned told, he said, there sure was a fire in Ripley that day. He said, what them Yankees done was mighty mean. Well, when the war was over, when he was in his 90s, about 1940, he died in 47 and is buried near the Colonel up here, right across that little blacktop road. He's got a nice monument put up by the Faulkner family. He said that he just wasn't freed at the end of the war because he just flat refused to be free. And he stayed with them, went to Oxford to live with them. Till he got so old, he said they promised him that when he got too old to help them anymore, he could come back to Ripley and live and die. And they brought him back. And there's a nice picture of him in the Tippah County book with his suit and stuff on. They kept him dressed nice, and it's good to him, and he was good to them. But I always thought that was worth mentioning when telling about him burning Ripley. He was so faithful to him all the years. But grandfather lived until 1887 and died at 82 years old. So he went through a lot of hardship, and he lost his wife during that war to sickness after those children were killed. In that war, after he lost his 2 sons. His other 2 sons made it back. He lost one of his son-in-laws, like I said, and suffered greatly. Almost lost his own life. Now, I don't read much stuff. I try to go from memory, but I want to read you something about the color sergeant of the 34th Mississippi. I think it's important here tonight because I'm trying to get the old 34th flag back for Tippah County. I've been working on this a good while through the Farrell family. Dr. Frank Farrell was the regimental surgeon for the 34th. And his brother was color sergeant, was severely wounded in Chickamauga, Georgia, but in the right leg and left arm, but returned. And when the surrender was made, he took the flag from his staff rather than give it up, and took his shirt off and wrapped it around his body and put his clothes back on over, and brought it back to Tippah County, and kept it to his death in 1934 at age 92, when he died at Asheville. Every Confederate reunion he went to till he got in 1930, where he couldn't go, he waved it and carried it with him. And this is just a little article in 1888 from the Fayette County Press. While the band was playing, the most pathetic scene was witnessed. Z.C. Farrell of Benton County, colored bearer of the 34th Mississippi Regiment, who had just arrived on a late train, came up the aisle all alone, carrying the weather-beaten old Confederate flag. Every eye was on him, for in appearance he was a typical Confederate soldier. His step was sturdy. His expression seemed sad but determined. He was clad in very ordinary garb, heavy boots, slouched hat, and carried an old army satchel on his back. Just before the rostrum, he saluted Colonel Faulkner, the master of ceremonies, who beckoned him to a seat. Before taking it, however, he stepped to the front and saluted the crowd by waving aloft the old flag. To this, the crowd raised loud yells of applause, which lasted several minutes, during which time hundreds of eyes were filled with overflowing tears. I hope this flag can be got back and preserved and stored before it's too late for it. So that's what we're trying to do about that. But anyway, his brother was the regimental surgeon for this unit, and they both survived the war. They had three other brothers, John, Alfonso, and Henry, who passed in Virginia